Me. Today is Wednesday, May 2nd, 2018, and this is the 12th episode of my virtual workshop series on intuitive eating, and we're here today talking about deprivation. I'm trying to find some ways to keep this kind of fresh because I'm getting tired of looking at the background, which is the back of my office. I don't know if anybody's wondered what that the little cage thing is in the back. That is for my 7-month-old puppy, Neptune, which hopefully we'll be able to get rid of in a couple months if he can become a better citizen. He's doing pretty good, but I'm getting tired of looking at that. So I was going to try to maybe broadcast from outside, but I need to plan that out a little bit better because, because there seems to always be landscapers in my neighborhood, and so I need to find a quiet place where I could do that. But I'm like, I live in Florida. Doesn't everybody want to look at palm trees in the background? Not my ugly, the back of my office and my husband's consulting poster, his joke poster that's hanging up on the wall. So I'm going to try to find some better locations, maybe to start broadcasting from and try to liven things up a little bit. So today we are here talking about deprivation, and it's really super important to understand what effects deprivation have on us psychologically if we want to take the next step towards intuitive eating. Just before I go any further, here's my usual disclaimer that everything I say here is for educational and informational purposes only, and it's not meant to take the place of any advice you might receive from your healthcare practitioner. But on to the real stuff. Okay, deprivation. So why should we care about deprivation as it pertains to intuitive eating? Because that's what we're trying to get away from with intuitive eating. We're trying to move away from depriving ourselves and all that goes with that. We're trying to move away from restricting ourselves. We're trying to move away from depriving ourselves of certain foods, from meeting our needs, from living a satisfied life. Because often food is what we turn our focus to when we aren't meeting our other needs, right? We can focus on our body, and we might forget that we don't have such a great marriage. We can focus on the meal plan. We might forget that our parents are aging and we have to figure out what to do with them. We can focus on burning a certain number of calories, and we don't have to focus on the fact that our child is not doing well in school or something. When we focus on the planning and prepping and researching, and then we focus on controlling our cravings and sticking to the plan, and then we turn our focus from all that to the short-term successes, we congratulate ourselves and we're like, hey, I'm doing this one thing right, and my life must be good. Or we can focus on the failure of the plan, and kind of beat ourselves up and say, turn the focus to, if I could just get this one thing right, then everything will work out and I'll be happy. So if we take the focus off of the diet and the control and all of that, we can focus on what's really going on in our lives, right? And that is the point, and it may not be what we are ready to deal with. So that's something to consider. But deprivation is just a concept that we really want to look at because it's indicative of maybe some things that you do in your whole life. It might carry over from food and the way you treat your body to the whole rest of your life. But let's focus on deprivation as it pertains specifically to intuitive eating. So deprivation, or depriving ourselves, or restricting food, making certain foods off limits, aka dieting, in addition to all the biological reactions that we've already talked about. Remember all those biological reactions to deprivation we talked about, the carbohydrate cravings and the food obsessions, the hoarding, gathering recipes, trolling Pinterest, dreaming about our next meal, all those strange behaviors they noticed during the starvation study that I talked about. And all those behaviors that were determined to be caused by, not by some predisposition those men had to acting like dieters. Remember, they were chosen because they had superior biological and psychological characteristics. and they were not men who worried about their weight. But those behaviors were determined to actually have been caused by a scientific, biological, human reaction to starvation. And they determined that we evolved to behave in these ways because it benefits us. Because our ancestors, who were best able to focus on food, on finding food and procuring food, especially after a famine, those ancestors, the ancestors who evolved to be superior at storing fat, they're the ones who actually survived, and we are their relatives. So the fact that we are good at storing fat is actually a good thing biologically, evolutionarily. But all that discussion, that was about biology. But now I want to illustrate how deprivation messes with your psychology. Deprivation can have serious psychological effects. And I think the best way, beyond going into like some POW studies that happened during the war, and prisoners who have been, like people who have been abducted and kidnapped and kept in a room, they've kind of seen a trend in their behaviors and what they reported happened to them while they were there in their mind. But in our real life examples, I think the best way to illustrate these effects is to just give you a couple of examples that you might relate to. So if you're someone who has ever tried the grapefruit diet, for example, where you mostly eat grapefruit all day, like twice a day, and then you eat an extremely low-fat dinner, well, on that diet, you were, quote-unquote, allowed to eat all the grapefruit you wanted, but no other fruit. And while on the grapefruit diet, maybe you craved bananas. Just as an example, maybe you craved apples or pineapple or something more sustaining, but bananas comes to mind to me. And then when the grapefruit diet didn't last, maybe you went paleo. Now, on paleo, bananas are quote unquote allowed, but not peanut butter. And all of a sudden you start craving peanut butter. Then, when paleo became too laborious for you to stick to in real life, you went vegetarian, the complete opposite, right? First you had all the meat, now you have no meat. Now as a vegetarian, peanut butter and bananas are encouraged. In fact, peanut butter as a vegetarian is heralded as one of the best plant-based source of protein for non-meat-eaters. Hey, meat-eaters. So, of course, when you switch to vegetarian, then all you crave is steak. Why is that? Well, the simple fact of the matter is, in human psychology, when you make something quote unquote off limits, you instantly make it more attractive to your psyche. That's a fact. They have scientifically proven it. With animals, with humans, they've even conducted studies with children where they offered a room full of brand new, sparkly, sometimes still in the package toys, and then one beaten up old cardboard box. And they put children one at a time so that they don't have to share. All these toys are at their disposal. They put children into the room and they say, here, you can play with all these toys, any one of the toys you want, any brand new toy, except you can't touch the cardboard box. And every time, without fail, what do the children want? The cardboard box. There's lots of reasons for this phenomenon. Psychologists have studied it for a long, long time. And there are a lot of theories as to why human beings psychologically respond to deprivation this way. But it really doesn't matter unless you're a science geek like me, and you might want to do some further reading on it. If that's the case, let me know, and I can point you in the direction of a couple of the studies that are really interesting to read, the ones that I read related to this episode. But here in this forum, all that matters is when we deprive ourselves of something intentionally, something that we want, or sometimes even something we didn't think we wanted. The moment we take that thing away and say, nope, you can't have this thing, that triggers several different mechanisms inside us that start fighting to get that thing back and have it, possess it, own it, consume it. And the more we make something off limits, the more we deprive ourselves, the more the want for that thing gets heightened in our perception. There's something that's been termed a craving life. And when you make something, especially food, off limits, that's when the craving life is conceived, basically. And it builds and builds and builds, and eventually it takes over. So because of this concept called the deprivation guilt cycle, which is tied in with the idea of quote unquote willpower. And I just have to take a side note, I don't actually believe in willpower based on the reading that I've done. There is a large body of writing around the idea that willpower is actually a myth. That's probably not the right word for it, but it's a cultural concept that was created to make people feel shameful about quote unquote giving in to quote unquote temptations that had been deemed quote unquote sinful or quote unquote guilty pleasures. Things like sex, drugs, alcohol, decadent, basically anything that's fun, basically anything that certain portions of the population were trying to keep other portions of the population away from. They came up with this concept of willpower, and people tell other people that you should be able to exert your will to avoid these things that you want. Then follows, if you lack the will, you are somehow weak or less than. And so this whole idea of willpower was adopted by the diet industry. And that all plays into the concept that we should deprive ourselves of certain foods so that we can lose weight. And we should exercise our willpower to maintain the deprivation. I mean, we can see the memes out there. I posted one of them this week about how willpower is like a muscle. And the more you use it, the stronger it gets. And that, in my opinion, is complete garbage. It's totally untrue. And it was created to make you feel badly about not being able to maintain the deprivation, which you shouldn't be able to because it's a fact of human evolution. So this is all leading up to the conclusion of how to make peace with food, which is the point of this month's series of episodes, which is Principle 3 of Intuitive Eating from the book Intuitive Eating by Tribole and Resch, which you may already be guessing at. But in the meantime, until I get to the conclusion, I'd love it if you, my dear viewers, could spend some time experimenting with this concept of deprivation. And if you have a pen or pencil and some paper nearby, it might make sense just to jot down some of these questions that resonate with you. But over the next week, I would love for you to think back on your personal experiences with dieting or with trying new meal plans and think, have you ever experienced what I'm talking about? Have you ever gone on a meal plan that restricts a certain food or food group? Say ice cream or chocolate or wine or bread. When you did that, did you experience heightened cravings for these things? Maybe not at first, when the dieter's resolve was high. The high of the new diet was strong. You were bolstered by the hopes and dreams of a new you, and the new life that's supposed to follow with the new you. But once that started to fade, did you maybe crave those foods that were off limits a little more than others? Or did you crave the apples and oatmeal and scrambled eggs, which were all totally delicious foods, but probably quote unquote permitted on your meal plan? And if you can't remember ever having that experience, I would love for you to do a little experiment for the next week until you tune in next week. I would love for you to choose 3 to 4 foods that you love and take some time choosing them. They should be foods that you really do love. You consider them an important part of your happiness diet. But they should also be foods that would usually fall into the quote unquote permitted category, but maybe not all the time. Maybe like healthier indulgences like frozen yogurt or dark chocolate or wine or cheese. Foods that are delicious to you and would normally be considered healthy in moderation. And for the next week, I want you to move them to the off limits category. You are not allowed to eat them for 1 week. And in this time, I'd love it if you would take note of how many times you wish you could have those foods. And that's it. That's the experiment. And I want you to become hyper aware of your thoughts around these foods. Notice your cravings. Notice your thoughts about the food and other foods, the ones that are allowed. Notice how often you sit around wishing you could have them. Notice whether you agree with my idea about willpower or not. Notice if you experience any guilt or thoughts of should or shouldn't. Notice whether you feel virtuous for sticking to the experiment. Are you patting on your back, like patting yourself on the back, like I'm doing so good at this? Notice whether you feel any resentment towards others when they partake in these foods. Notice whether you feel any resentment towards me for inflicting these rules upon you. Notice any fantasies you have about these foods. Notice whether you turn to other foods as a substitute. Say you put wine off limits and then all of a sudden you're like, but I can drink all the vodka. Notice whether you start planning how you'll incorporate these foods back into your life come next week. Do you start planning for how you'll enjoy them the moment this experiment is over? Or maybe the experiment is too artificial for you. So then take these questions with you and store them away for the next time you're thinking about making any food off limits. Or the next time you're thinking about letting a meal plan dictate the quantity of foods for you. You know, there are a lot of lifestyle change diets in disguise that are coming out now that are saying no food is restricted. All foods are allowed, permitted. There's nothing that's off limits. You can eat whatever you want. But the way they do that is they give you very specific quantities that you're allowed to eat. And the same concept holds true. You can drink wine, but you can have this little thimble full of wine and that's it. Well, who wants a thimble full of wine? I mean, you just want to pour a glass of wine and have it look pretty, and have it look like a real glass of wine and not measure it, right? So the way those meal plans work is they tell you exactly how much you can consume of those foods because they've calculated a number of calories and that's what they're trying to keep you in. And that's not what's supposed to guide how much you eat. And know that your psychology and your biology will fight back with everything within you. So anytime you allow something external to be the guide for what or how much you eat, you are setting yourself up to be at battle with yourself. And hopefully by now it's becoming clear that you might win the battle, you might win a few battles, but you'll never win the war. So next week I'll share with you some of the descriptions of the types of eating you might fall into as a backlash to periods of deprivation. This is after the diet or some other times when maybe you weren't on a diet, but you participated in this backlash to deprivation. These are some of the types. I'll just give you a little preview. The types of the backlash eating, like eating everything this weekend that you'll miss when you embark on the diet on Monday morning. That's called Last Supper eating, when you order pizza and drink all the wine and drink all the ice cream with the thought that the deprivation is coming. I'm not going to be allowed to have these things come Monday, so I better eat it all now. That's called Last Supper eating. Or when you go home to your hometown, eating everything that's unique to your hometown. I'm from a town called Madison, New Jersey, and they are famous for Taylor ham, egg, and cheese, and everything Italian, and the best pizza, and the best bagels, and the best. Well, if I went home and ate all of that, because I only go home so often, that's called returning home syndrome. And there are others, there are a couple others. And I just share them to illustrate all the ways that we get sucked in by deprivation. It's not just after you've deprived, it can be in anticipation of, or there are all these psychological processes that we go through, and it's all like a wagon wheel around deprivation. So more on that next time. But until next week, if you liked this episode, please share it. Give me a like, or drop a comment. Let me know that you were here listening, because I do see how many views I have, but unless I see you live, I don't know that you saw it. So I don't really know who I'm getting to watch this. And I would love to start an open forum, or, maybe have some discussion groups, or I don't know, Zoom calls or something where people could ask questions. But just share with your friends and family, share the link, let them know that you've been watching me. I also have a YouTube channel. All of a sudden, I was telling my son about it this morning. He's like, "What's the name?" And I was like, I don't know. I don't really know that much about YouTube, so I'm gonna have to figure that out. But I'm just getting out there in the world of live technology. So I'll have to ask my 8-year-old how to do that. But I would love to hear from you. Tell me how deprivation has affected you or someone you know. Have you ever experienced the deprivation guilt cycle, where when you start the cycle of the diet, your guilt is low because you're feeling very virtuous and you're not ashamed, you're sticking to the rules. And as then you progress into the diet, the deprivation becomes harder and harder. This craving life builds, and all of a sudden you can't take it anymore. Because everything biologically and psychologically is fighting back. So then you drop down into the, eating all the foods that you miss and doing all the behaviors that your brain is basically forcing you to do because you just can't fight yourself anymore. And that's when your guilt is very high. And that's what switches you over into the crazy thinking that the answer is the next diet, because that diet didn't work. So let me find one that does. Let me find one that's easier to stick to, or one that has the foods that I love that I know I'll miss too much. So let me find the next one. That's when that mentality catches hold, is when your guilt is very high and your deprivation is low, and all the blame is placed on yourself. So that's what brings you to the next, back again. It's the cycle. Deprivation is high, guilt is low. Deprivation is low, guilt is high. So tell me if you've ever experienced that, if you've ever gone through the deprivation guilt cycle. Drop me a comment or send me a PM if you prefer to be private about it. And if you would rather contact me privately, you can find all my contact information on my website, which is www.kpcoachingjupiter.com. Send me an email, call me, text me, PM me. I'm here. I want to help you. I want you to be happy. Thank you for tuning in today. It's great to see you showing up with me every week. I have the same people coming back, which is awesome. I hope I am making a difference in your life. And I hope to see you again next week. But until then, be well and bye for now.